Okay, let's shift this over a little bit. Let's bring this into view. And I'm going to try to bring the water into view as well. So with this, I'm trying to address a few different questions and comments. Okay, so welcome to another painting tutorial. I'm Andrew Broussard. I'm going to start this off with answering two questions. One from my friend Miss Margaret. She was asking about the water concentration that I use. So I was doing a little bit of adjusting, so we're playing around with how we are on the screen and whatnot. And I want you guys to be able to see the dipping and the re-wetting and how I do that. Because sometimes between every stroke that I do with the rigger, I will literally dip in and go into the mixture pigment, and then get it going. The second question that I had was in the comments yesterday of another video, asking if I pre-stretched the canvas. And they had said it looked like I put very little water on in the beginning. I may have started wetting the canvas before I started the video, so I don't pre-stretch. What I do is I take my hake, and you'll see how many times I actually pull from this. And as you know, if you use a hake brush, it's a large quantity of water that I'm laying on. And that's what, this is the fourth time right here. And I'll try to get the whole surface covered. Now, I could leave some areas blank, and that'll be something we'll incorporate in different videos. Eventually, I'm going to need a pad of paper right here for me to write down all these things, because somebody had commented in the last one, please do videos on composition, and I had replied, I just want to do some more research so I could have the different aspects, and maybe we'll do a series with that. But there's just so many ideas that come up, like even in the moment just now, just an idea of leaving some parts dry and some parts wet. But anyway, so I put copious amounts of water down. I don't pre-stretch, and what's happening here is the water is soaking, paper soaking up, its fibers are changing and whatnot, and some buckling and all that start to take place. I use these binder clips or the bulldog clips for the stretching purpose. Right here in this corner, it's starting to lift a little bit, so I press down and I flatten it. People who paint on an angle with the watercolors, that'd be people like Stephen Cronin, I believe David Usher, Lois Davidson, I think Joe Menza as well. They're all people that paint fast and loose in this style. They all paint on an angle. So you can see how they stretch theirs. They're able to grab the corner and pull it. The bulldog clips work well, but I don't think they're the best for me laying flat. I also have an actual nut on the bottom of this board that I have, so that I can screw it onto my tripod if I wanted to go out and about. There's a lot of different material online in regards to stretching. This is 140 pound paper, and if I'm not mistaken, what that means is we have like a ream of paper, and what the weight of that ream is translates to the weight of the paper. The higher the number, the thicker and heavier the paper, the more resistance to warping, I believe. Some people in the fast and loose style will utilize 90 pound paper, which I believe is really light, more prone to warping or buckling and whatnot. But with the fast and loose style and doing this quick stretching, that works out. 140 I think is the most common that people will use. And then there's 300 pound, I believe. And 300 pound is like really thick, and I don't think it really needs to be stretched or anything like that. I'm not sure. So if you're going to use 300 pound, just research that. There are different stretching techniques. I think there's actual borders that you could put on and wet, and it kind of clamps everything down. There's a lot of the textbooks or tutorial books will talk about double-sided tape, and I think they'll put it down, wet it, let it dry, and then cut it out. Because I guess as the drying happens, I think it's like the head of a drum, where you put the drum down, it might be wet or something like that, and then it dries and everything tautens up and tightens up. I think some people staple it down and let it flatten, and I think some people just put water, like a piece of paper, in the bathtub to let it soak and readjust. So that's something for you all to check out. I think some people take stretching very seriously, and some books take it very seriously, and other people are very nonchalant, laissez-faire about it. I think this is a method that just works for me with these binder clips. This is probably more on the laissez-faire side. But I think if you were to tape the edges, if masking tape and it wasn't taped down completely, I did experience a lot of issues with within the painting process, where I would have a buckle in this range or maybe in the corners because I couldn't adjust the tape as the paper was wet. So play around with that. If you're having issues, check the paper that you're using as well. I don't want to knock any brands of paper, and I don't want to shame anybody for whatever brand they're able to afford or anything like that. But if you're buying lower quality paper or cheaper paper and you're maybe experiencing more of these issues, just look into ways to stretch it, and maybe that'll help you out. I've talked about this a lot with Joe Menza in the past, paper quantity and brand and whatnot. Within this range, a big sheet I think cost me about $5. This is the 140 pound. If I did arches, it'd be about $7 for the big sheet within this type of texture and weight. But that breaks down to $1 or so per painting. But whenever you're doing practice, and as you see, I've been doing massive numbers of paintings, it does add up after a while. So, some people do recommend a Fabriano, a half and half, or a 75-25 combination of cotton and what is it, cellulose or something like that. And those papers react differently. I just prefer the 100% cotton going with this. That was a long, unexpected ramble, and I apologize for that. But hopefully there was some information to take away. Also, don't take my word as gospel or anything like that. Use it as a starting point for you to research these things and see what conversations are taking place. You could probably, what do they say? You could ask 5 people and you get 10 different answers. So, yeah. But don't fall too far down that rabbit hole. Try to spend time painting. Okay, so yesterday I uploaded a time lapse of me kind of just playing around, and it was kind of a wintry type mix, and then as I came forward I really started developing, playing around with a tree. So I think today we'll do another imaginary tree, this time with me more talking during it, because the other one was time-lapse. There was no talking taking place. That's Alizarin Crimson. This is just some raw sienna. I didn't set up my palette like usual. I kind of have it a little dirty and muddy right now. I took a spritzer bottle and spritzed it down. I find that this is just a really great tool to get your paints just re-wet and get everything started going on there. And since we're going to be focused on the tree itself, kind of just putting this stuff in. So I started painting a little bit late today. Let's say it's about a little bit past 10 o'clock on Monday, 10 a.m. Monday. Just had some chores and some things to do. And we could put stuff in the background. It's good practice to kind of do little things back here, but like I said in other videos, a lot of times this doesn't show through in the final product for me, but it helps me make up this imaginary scene. I had started looking through some photos I had taken on my computer, and I did have a lot of photos of oak trees and cypress trees that I had taken. But when I went to go drag and drop it into my email so that I could bring it over into my Kindle, the Kindle Fire, so that I can show you an image of it. My computer, the internet window crashed. But so this time we'll focus more on just like ideas with it, and then in the future I'll get some photo reference for y'all. What I'd like to do is start providing a lot of photo reference on the Patreon site for y'all to use. Sometimes us painters are kind of starved for resources, so sharing that type of stuff is helpful for everybody. I had thought about using something from the internet, like a free type, open source photo, but I don't know how that is with me showing that on one of these videos. I don't make any profit off of these videos unless somebody signs up for the Patreon. So I don't know if you're allowed to show those things since you're not making a profit. Anyway, so I just kind of put an idea in here. Really not much going on. We could play around with the sky more, but we are going to really explore branches and different techniques and see what works, see what doesn't work, and see what we want to experiment with. But we could just kind of drop a little bit of clouds in here. Okay, so we have our paper set up. With this, we'll start wet and wet. We're going to put oak tree. We're going to start right down here in this region. We'll start him low and close, and we're going to slowly build him up. So first I'm going to kind of just push around, get a little idea for the oak. And one word that we need to keep in mind is organic. And it's a really important word within painting and arts and whatnot. And organic is kind of just having a nice, like a flow and a ripple and a shapes to it, where we're not hard straight lines, squares, etc. This is just more if you think of an old gnarled tree, that'd be organic and flowing. Okay, so I'm going to use light red. I'll grab some sap green. We're going to wind up using a variety of paints. Here things are going to kind of spread out some, so We're gonna have to be careful because it's the wet and wet. But we're gonna wind up feeding a lot of different colors in. The trunk is gonna wind up getting bigger. I find that as I do these oaks, or at least in yesterday's time lapse, I just really started adding into that spot. But I felt like I didn't have the best branch structure in it, where we came up thick and it didn't go too wild, and maintain that thickness and that spread that takes place. Over in Lafayette at, I think it's St. Paul's Cathedral or St. John's Cathedral, there's a very old oak tree at UL, University of Louisiana, at Lafayette. There's a lot of oak trees on campus and whatnot. Actually, the square a few blocks away where I do the farmers market and sell paintings, they it's all oak trees and all that. And the oak trees, they grow so big, they have to add in these posts underneath these branches that help support those branches. Okay, so we kind of have our generic shape. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some Payne's Gray, mix it with ultramarine and burnt sienna, and in the wet and wet, I'm going to feed ideas of where the shadows are going to be, and this is going to create that organic effect. It's going to have those ripples, it's going to have those bulges, it's going to have the indentations. We're going to seed it into the ground. A lot of this stuff at this step will blur together, and we're going to have to come back over it a few times and feed stuff in. And that's just, for me, that's the only way I can really get this to work. I think other people would have different approaches. I'm not sure. Let's see how good this is showing up on the stream. Okay, so you can kind of see we have that variation in there. We can start playing around with that. At this step also, I want to take the rigger, and now you can see how I go back and forth mixing with this. I want to mix purplish gray, purplish blue gray, and these are going to be for branches as well. But that's to help reseed these branches into the image itself. So we're going to use a lot of varying tone and color in order to create a 3D effect for this tree. These guys, I want you to think is coming from the back of that tree and going away from us. We could even have branches coming off of these that will extend away. And weave these around our branches that are already there. Come up, come behind. You could really explore and have fun with this. And the only thing you want to be careful of is like an X cross like that, or a hash mark type crossings. But besides that, literally just have fun with it. Like, don't think about it too much. Have some areas where you're going to have more of a density to it, some areas where there's going to be less density. But just put these in. Okay. So that was wet and wet right there still. I could now take the raw burnt sienna, mix that with a little bit of ultramarine to cool it down. But these guys should appear to come closer now. So you see the mixture on the more purple side and blue will push back, and these guys, you could also mix raw sienna. I didn't mix raw sienna into it yet, but that'll help it come forward as well. So we're creating all that 3D layers of these trees. And one thing that actually works out is the fuzziness that takes place in the wet and wet. With oak trees, you have a lot of moss, and you have these things called, I think they call them resurrection ferns, where they look super duper dead, growing on the oak trees. Then once it rains, they kind of come to life and they soak everything up. But all it does is make the trees look fuzzy. We can take our Payne's Gray. And I'm just going to try to get it dark. Let's get ultramarine. Sorry, burnt sienna. And add up some of these darker parts. You want to make sure you don't do too much of a straight line. Just feed stuff in and get the bends and the folds. This is just from my imagination, but you can look up oak trees. But if you look up oak trees, look up old and gnarled ones. I guess Google search oldest oak tree in America, something like that. In America, and you'll get the ideas. It's a little bit pure sienna in there. Bring this over. So I'm just accenting the dark areas. Unfortunately, with this one, we're going to have a brutal, brutal drying shift that takes place. And that's what happened with my time lapse as well. So I'm going to have to come in over that. We can take these super darks, more concentration for more branches. And the darkness of these ones help push it forward as well. So playing around with the warm and cool colors, and then lightness and darkness will help move and create the effect. You could even have branches that come over and come across the top, on top of these other branches. You could have stuff coming up from down below, some vines. Just creating that ground. Now we could take some raw sienna, so this is just dip in and then pulling off the raw sienna. You can feed that in to these lighter areas. I'll demonstrate the same thing with burnt sienna. And it's just feeding in to that wet. So this is kind of just an exercise in just having fun and letting loose and just drawing lines. Feeding in darks. Dab for texture. We could always make our Venetian red sap green mix for a brown variety. You can put calligraphy type strokes in here and get those different knots and whirls. You could also use the card for scraping. In fact, maybe we'll do a little bit of textured scraping in a bit. This is larger concentration of raw sienna in an ultramarine mix. Or burnt sienna, I'm not sure which one I had said. Payne's gray. Eventually I'll have to do with one with more foliage in it. Let's see how scraping would look at this stage, because we haven't done any dry offs. Everything is pretty wet. It creates a stark contrast between that soft diffusion we have and just allows more layers for the trees. Ooh, another way to describe organic is rocks. Most likely not going to have flat flagged stones. When you're looking out and about, you're going to have, the rounded, worn rocks and whatnot with different shapes and characteristics. That's going to be organic concept. Let's just put sap green to see how that blends in. In the Chinese painting, if they were to paint trees, and usually I think it's cherry blossom branches, when they paint those at the very end, they'll take I think it's a pigment made from like a malachite, and they'll add that in as like moss dots on the branches. And I think they refer to that as kind of like an emerald, like a jewel on the end of it. So you could add ideas like that too. What I'm thinking we're going to do in a few is do a dry off, but we're going to try not to do a complete dry off. We'll see if we can get areas that are wet, areas that are dry, so that we get sharp edges and soft edges in the same movement. Which honestly could probably be achieved by just taking a wet, clean brush and touching it in to some areas to wet in that area as well. So that's some ideas. The screen really took over right here. I just feel like I have to be careful with that green next to the raw sienna, burnt sienna. It just looks so Christmassy. When we lift weights, me and the guy I coach with, we use kilogram plates. Is that when we put on meets for like this, the big state or the United States competitions, we use kilogram plates, so we need to be able to utilize those as opposed to pounds and whatnot. But our plate set, the 25 kilograms are red, and then the 20 kilograms, I believe, the 10 kilograms are green in the plate set, I believe. So you put those together and it looks Christmassy when you load the bar. So it's a little awkward. I'm just bringing this down off the edge of the paper because I don't want that white to be there when the mat goes on top. So you see how often I dip this into the water and they go right into the pigment. So, let's see. We gotta make sure we don't neglect this very top portion. We don't want it to be too bare. Okay, let's do a dry off. We'll take a look. We'll see how the color is going to shift when we do this. The tone's going to shift. If you have headphones on, just be careful. We didn't do a complete dry off, so we'll see at this stage how it affects it. Let's first get more on the grayish blue side. So I don't let that other one sit back further, so even the big branches are sitting back kind of far. So let me see if I could get a mixture of raw sienna, burnt sienna, a little bit of ultramarine to tone it down. Let's see if we can get one that comes closer. Feed some Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray in some dark areas. Notice how I'm using this side of the brush to scribble in and create a texture. So I don't want it to be a straight line. I don't want it to be like a square. I want it to be organic. Oh, somebody had asked me, and I guess I'll have to address this at the beginning of the next video. This is a #1 silver black velvet script liner, or rigger. That's what they call it. You can get that offline off of blick.com, or I think Amazon has that brand up. A little bit more blue. We may call this one finished in a few. I just want to see how it all dries. I just want to make sure it's not too light. And whenever you feed in, you can scrape that. Break it up. And you can dab. Now, one thing you can do, I'm going to take the hake, I'm going to dry most of the water out of it, so I'm just squeezing it with a paper towel. You can change, pull off some of those wet areas. You could also mix, got a little bit of Payne's gray on there. Little fuzzies to the end of these branches. I'm debating adding foliage to this one. I don't know if I should save it for another time. Let's see. I'm gonna be delicate with this. Okay, so this is raw sienna, ultramarine, kind of a greenish gray. A smattering is foliage, that's what we'll do. We'll darken so I add some green to it. I think, or some foliage. We could really go hardcore at this step and really build this up. And you know what? We're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going for it. Sap green. Though I should have been doing this throughout to get that layering, so now I kind of have to decide who's going to put on top of and who's going to weave behind. Darken it up with Payne's Gray. Excuse me. Card just for texture, branch concepts. We could dab if we wanted. But I think we pushed it to a point where we should say that we're satisfied with this experiment. Okay, so we'll dry it off, we'll put a mat over it, we'll sign it. All right, I'm gonna end with my spiel, and then one last comment. If you like this video, please like, subscribe. Feel free to ask comments. Anything you wanted me to address, or you thought maybe could be approached differently, let me know. If you like this content, please consider supporting me on Patreon, or I think I even have just a link for PayPal if you wanted to just send like $1 or $2 for paper and whatnot. Also, I'm going to upload it to my Etsy account if you're ever interested in buying any of these. I have those up on the Etsy. What else? Oh, we dried it off, and if you're following along, feel free to follow along. Feel free to paint, whatever I paint and whatnot, and have fun with it. And I'm going to start saying, like, listen, if you paint this and somebody's like, hey, I want to buy it from you, go for it. You can sell that painting. You have my permission. So, and that'll help you all in your endeavor with watercolor and whatnot. Because then you'll have some cash money to buy more supplies as well. Also, at this stage, if we really wanted to, we could do another layer as well, but we're going to call it at that. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all soon.